And welcome back. We have a 2015 Nissan Versa Note, and today we're going to go ahead and get to the spark plugs as well as the ignition coils. Now you don't need to have a Versa Note to follow along with this repair. This 1.6 liter came in almost all Versas, but all you have to do is pop your hood open, and if your engine looks similar to this, and don't forget to check your owner's manual, then you should be good to follow along if you have the same 1.6 liter. We're going to start off on the left side of the engine, so just grab a set of pliers and pull back the clamps right here. You don't have to go too far back, maybe about an inch or two, and you're free to take off these vacuum hoses. Sometimes these rubber hoses can be stuck in place. That's why I'm using my pliers here to give it a bit of a twist, and once it breaks loose, you should be able to take it off. Now keep in mind, you don't want to squeeze too hard on it because it's just plastic and you don't want to break any of this. Okay, so now we're done on the left side of the engine for now, so let's go on the other side, right where the air box is at. We need to get the air box that's connected to the throttle body out of the way. So the first step is to disconnect the MAF sensor. It's just a tab that you have to press on top, and then you can pull it upward. It should disconnect. And here's one more clamp, and once we get that clamp out of the way, we could go ahead and pull off this hose that's going into the air box. Okay, good. So the next step is to remove more hoses. This is the evap solenoid, so we're just gonna go ahead and remove the hose that's on the right side. We have to remove both of them, but since we're trying to get the air box out of the way first, we only need to remove the hose that's on the right side. And as you can see, now we have access to the clamp that's holding the air box onto the throttle body. Now I'm using a screwdriver here, but it's probably easier to just use your 8mm socket and get this off. And now we lift up these two tabs, and this is the housing where our air filter is at. So once we get all of that unbolted, the top half of the air box should be free to come off. You may have to wiggle it a little bit back and forth, but it will come off, and we're just gonna move it off to the side so it's not in our way. The reason why I'm moving the air box off to the side instead of taking it off completely is because it's still attached via some wires, and I just don't feel like disconnecting those wires right now. So just having it pushed off to the side works perfectly fine. And now we can remove that other hose off of the evap purge valve, and it comes off just that simple. And we're also gonna have to disconnect the connector, which is right here. You just press in on that tab and it should come off. And that's all we have to do with this section right here. The next step is to separate the throttle body from the intake manifold. Now there's two ways you can do this. Number one is the way I'm doing it, which is taking off the four 8mm fasteners that hold it onto the intake manifold. The other way is to leave the throttle body attached to the intake manifold, but you disconnect it from the wire harness and you take off the other two hoses. The reason why I don't like the second method is because, number one, I don't know if you disconnect the power and the grounds and all that stuff going to the computer of the car. I don't know if this throttle body is going to have some sort of a relearn procedure, and I don't want to go through that. The second reason is the other two hoses that you would have to disconnect, they actually have coolant or antifreeze going through them, and I don't want to deal with losing any antifreeze right now or having to deal with a mess that I have to clean up. So by far, I think the easiest method is to just take off the four fasteners, and that way once the throttle body is off, you just go ahead and set it aside. You don't even have to take it off the car, just move it aside like I did here. Now the next step is to work on getting the intake manifold off. So I'm just showing you where these fasteners are, and obviously it's a very tight place, so it's going to be a bit difficult getting the camera in there, but I am going to try my best. So I'm using a 1/4 inch ratchet to get these 10mm off. Surprisingly, they were on there much tighter than I expected, so you may want to use a 3/8 ratchet for this. Now as far as removing the intake manifold, I have two tips for you. The first one is to use a magnet. Some of these fasteners are really hard to see, they're even harder to get your fingers on, so the magnet really comes in hand at grabbing the fasteners when they're loose. The second tip is the actual dipstick that's right here, the yellow one. I left mine in place, but towards the end, once I had all of the fasteners removed and I was ready to take the intake manifold off, I found that the dipstick was actually in my way. I still left it there and I just kind of worked around it, but it would benefit you to just remove the dipstick, maybe put a piece of tape over the hose so that nothing falls inside. But yeah, you definitely want to remove it. It's going to help you. And while I'm going through these steps in the video, I just want to take this time to talk about my sponsors. I don't have any, so that's that, and we'll continue with the video. This one fastener right here was probably the most troublesome, only because this wire harness is right in front of it and it's just a little bit more difficult to get to this fastener. Now that the lower fasteners are off of the manifold, we only have two more that are right on top. These are pretty much the easy ones to get off. The first one is going to be on the left side, right where those two hoses are that we removed at the beginning of the video. And the final fastener is going to be on the right side of the manifold, right in front of the throttle body. Now it's time to remove this harness. It goes to the evap solenoid. It actually pops off of here pretty easy. And with that last little piece done, that should be everything. You should be able to get the manifold off now. Now I noticed here, like I mentioned earlier, you may want to take off the oil dipstick. It was kind of in the way. But the biggest thing that's in the way is that large wire harness that just comes over the right side of the manifold, right where that lower bolt is at. That's the only thing that you're really kind of like fighting off here. With the manifold out of the way, you have great access to everything. So starting off on the right side, you have cylinder number 4, 3, 2, and 1. I'm giving you this information for anyone who's trying to diagnose a problem. Let's just say you have a misfire on cylinder number 2. Now you know which cylinder is number 2. The first step is to remove the coil, and all you have to do is remove this harness by pressing on that little clip and pulling outward. It should pop right off. Then we're going to remove the one fastener that's holding down the coil. Each coil has one fastener holding it down, so it's very easy to get off. And once you get that fastener off, all you have to do is wiggle it back and forth. Just kind of play with it. Do not go like caveman style on it, and go crazy, because it will break. You can break it, and if it does, they're not cheap. Now if you were to pull this out and find all this oil inside of here, then you have an issue with your valve cover seals, and you have to get those replaced, because there should be no oil inside of the area where the spark plug goes. Now as far as sockets for the spark plugs, there's only two of them are going to fit, either a 14mm or a 9/16 socket, and they have to be a thin wall socket. If you have a thick wall socket like an impact socket, it's typically not going to work. Now if you're using an actual spark plug socket, they have like a rubber grommet inside, so that once the spark plug is loose and you lift up, the spark plug should stay attached to the socket. In my case, I'm using a regular socket, so I just use a magnet to pull out the spark plug, and here it goes. Now I don't have to change the spark plug because my car only has about 15,000 miles on it, so these spark plugs are still in great condition. Whenever you buy a new spark plug, you should always check the gap, because right out of the box they're not going to be exactly the same, and most likely they're not going to be where they need to be as far as the manufacturer's recommendations. So you can get this cheap tool at any local auto parts store to check and adjust the gap on a spark plug. Now you don't want to use this edge right here, which is going to increase the gap as you go around. You actually want to use this hole that's kind of drilled in the top right here to open up the gap. Now you don't want to go all willy-nilly on this thing also, because it's very easy to break this tip of the spark plug. So it's just trial and error, go back and forth and take your time until you get the gap correct. Now before you put in a new spark plug, put a little bit of anti-seize on the threads, and that's just to ensure that it doesn't get stuck in there the next time you have to come in here and service the spark plugs. Another quick tip is to grab like a fuel hose or something, put the spark plug in it, and you see how I was able to gently lower the spark plug in there and thread it on. Now you just pull up on the fuel hose, and there you go, the spark plug stays in the cylinder head. And of course, you should always follow the torque specs, especially for spark plugs, because the cylinder head is made out of aluminum. So if you over torque that spark plug, chances are you are going to pull the threads on the head, and then you're just going to open up a can of worms at that point. It's going to get very expensive very fast. So just play it safe, torque it down to the correct spec. And I'm just going to go ahead and put a little bit of dielectric grease right on the boot of the coil. And if you've ever had a coil or an ignition wire stick onto a spark plug, you know exactly why I do this. At this point, if you've already changed your coil that you're in here to change, or all of your spark plugs, whichever it is, all of the hard work is done, and now you can start reassembly. So just connect your coil packs back in, put the fastener on them. Now this fastener, there's no specific torque or anything like that. You just want to get it snug, don't overdo it, because you can damage the coil itself. And look who tagged along. I have a little helper with me today, so she's always happy to be here with me. She's always smiling. Now before you put the manifold back on, you just want to check right here, right where the gasket is going to mate up against the cylinder head. And as you can see, I got some oil. It's just kind of, it's not a lot, but there is oil there, and you just want to make sure this mating surface is as clean as it can be. You definitely do not want any leaks, because it's going to cause a vacuum leak. That wire harness that gave you the trouble when you were trying to pull the manifold off, guess what? It's going to give you more trouble trying to put it back on. So that's the first thing I went for. I just try to get that right side of the manifold in, down there. Just try to slide behind the harness. Once you get that side in, the rest of it just kind of falls into place. And like any other job that I do, I always feel like the putting back together is much easier and faster than all of the taking apart, mainly because you know where everything's at already and you know what has to get done. So at this point, I'm not tightening anything down, I'm just putting everything in place. And a quick tip, if you don't have a magnetic socket, just grab like a piece of a paper towel and put it in the socket, and now your socket's gonna hold pretty much any fastener that you could put in there. It's gonna hold it very well. So like I said, I'm just getting all the fasteners on the manifold. Nothing's getting tightened down just yet. Once you get all of your fasteners in place, then you can proceed with torquing everything down the spec. And this is a plastic manifold, so the torque spec is 20 foot-pounds for this thing. Now there is a torquing sequence, so I have this image here on the screen, and you can see they're numbered. So just follow those numbers, and that's the sequence that you want to torque down the manifold. Now it's time to reinstall the throttle body. I looked in the book that I have and I could not find a torque spec for it, and I looked on the internet as well. Again, nothing. So the biggest thing to take away from here is to just let the gasket itself do its job. You don't have to over torque it. You just want to get it nice and snug. The fasteners themselves are just threading into some sort of a bronze or brass fittings, which are just pressed into the plastic manifold. So it doesn't take much to damage that. Like I said, just get them nice and snug. Don't overdo it. And now we can plug in the connector that goes into the evap, as well as the two rubber hoses that connect into it. Next up is the airbox again. Remember, it was just pushed off to the side. So now we're just gonna grab it, and the first thing you want to try to get on is right over the throttle body itself where that metal clamp is at. It's the first thing you want to try to get in place, and then you're gonna line up the actual housing where the air filter is at. And once you get that in place, you could just kind of lock down those tabs right now. And we're gonna go ahead and reconnect the MAP sensor, and as well as that extra hose that goes into the airbox with the clamp on it. When I initially took the clamp off of the throttle body, I was using that small screwdriver, but now that I got this rubber hose in the way, it's just much easier to use a ratchet and a socket on it. And let's not forget about the two very first hoses that we disconnected on the left side of the manifold. And that pretty much is it. So if you connected everything properly and you didn't forget about anything, you should be able to start the car up now, and the engine should run fine, assuming everything is working fine. The biggest thing to keep an eye out for here is your RPM. You want it to drop below 1,000. It should idle maybe somewhere around 850, 900, something like that. I'm not 100% sure, but if it has a high idle, chances are there's a vacuum leak. And that's pretty much it on how to get to your spark plugs and your ignition coils on your Nissan Versa. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you're considering subscribing, don't forget to hit that notification bell. And like always, thanks for watching.